The FAA is saying this is how we're going to get from where we are today in terms of how UAM type operations would proceed, which is basically under, current operational framework, just like a helicopter, operation. How we're going to get from that to this envisioned, very high volume, high tempo, dense operations in, congested areas kind of future that people are envisioning, how we're going to get there. And what it does is establish UAM corridors that I guess the FAA is going to be responsible for defining where these corridors are going to be. And then the quote unquote community of, operators, UTM companies, everybody combined that's in this industry is going to sort of collaboratively decide how do we increase restrictions, performance requirements, et cetera, so that we can slowly increase the tempo of operations. So the idea is that these corridors will have their own requirements for operations that is completely separate from the airspace around it, and that can increase over time. So as the tempo of operations meets capacity. Oh, and I should also add in, air traffic control will not provide tactical separation within these corridors. So that's the point, right? Is that ATC does not have the capacity to do this, so they won't. They just will not provide tactical separation. So as operations meet the capacity of the current operational framework, the community of companies can begin to increase the tempo of operations by either, creating new tracks within the corridors, or by increasing requirements either for the performance of the vehicles or for the performance of detect and avoid systems, or data sharing or whatever it is, so that they can reduce separation minima within the corridor and increase the tempo of operations. So it's the idea of trying to build a system that is adjustable over time and can scale up based on capabilities increasing over time, which fundamentally makes sense. But the FAA is kind of stepping back and saying, you guys, figure out how you want to do that, and we'll just kind of have oversight.
So, is there such a thing as being too open? Blades, what are your thoughts on that? Is this giving too much leeway and not enough standards?
Well, I think it's just a starting point. I think this is going to be hugely standards based, and they'll be integrated as we go through. In going through the ConOps, I saw a couple of things that I found interesting. It was talking about if you're first of all, it talks about being a pilot in control, being on the aircraft first, which is a requirement now. So that makes sense. So we're not going to see anything different than that for quite some time, even though the Ubers of the world would have you think different. I guess when they say that they have something in place by 2023, they never say it's going to be automated. But
No.
So, but but still to have a scheduled route, other than just a test route before then, or by that time, I think it's going to be a huge Hail Mary. But the one thing that I saw is when it's talking about if you're in the urban air mobility corridor and you have a malfunction, it tells you to get out of the corridor, and it tells you to turn on ADS-B and transponder. I'm thinking to myself, or ADS-B out. I'm like, why wouldn't you just have it on the whole time? I haven't gotten too deep into that, because if you're in being a pilot for 21 years, if you're that low to the ground and you have to worry about turning switches on because you have an incapacitated aircraft, that's not a good thing. But I don't know, just things like that, I think, and it was done in coordination with NASA and stuff like that. So again, this is going to be an evolving ConOps, and I think it's a good start. But I think that the future iterations of this are going to have some sort of definitions and standards in there, and those will be developed, as the market moves along.
On a similar vein, there was a line talking about air traffic control responsibilities regarding these UAM corridors, which are very few. They're not not going to do tactical separation, et cetera. But it said air traffic control will set availability of the corridors, closed and open based on time of day or the flow direction of nearby airports, that kind of thing. And then it said air traffic control will provide advisories regarding UAM operations to other aircraft on a workload permitting basis, which I thought was interesting. Which
Can
makes
you elaborate on workload permitting basis?
Yeah, I can't. I mean, that's exactly what it said. Yeah.
Well, I think
they didn't elaborate.
I think what it means from an air traffic perspective is if an air traffic controller is required for something, they're going to take the priority of the manned aircraft over the unmanned aircraft.
Okay.
That's what I see it as, but I mean, it could be wrong. But usually the least, the most amount of risk is going to be looked at first when it comes to air traffic control.
Right. I guess what I'm thinking is, I mean, the corridors are supposed to be, I mean, they will be public information and everything, but will all manned aircraft be completely aware of their presence and their operations and who is responsible for making sure that they are?
Yeah. And that, that's so a lot of this, I think, is going to end up being, by definition, incumbent on the urban air mobility aircraft, because you're still going to, if you look at the ConOps, the way I look at it, you're still going to have general aviation aircraft that are going to be allowed to go across the corridors, and they're not going to have the equipment that the urban air mobility aircraft are.
I'm not sure if that's correct, because the article, the ConOps says over and over again, it says the requirements for operation within or to cross the UAM corridors can be defined, blah, 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 blah. So the idea is that you will not be able to operate within or cross the corridor unless you meet the performance requirements for the corridor. So initially that'll be exactly the same as the airspace around it. But I think over time, as the performance requirements of the corridors change, general aviation aircraft may or may not be able to enter.
They may or may not be able to, but I think that's right. But I think you're going to get a pushback from GA, like you do with any other thing, like ADSP and all that. So sure. Yeah, I think you're right about that. That there's going to be minimum requirements. It's just a matter of if GA is going to push back on that, like they always did.
Yeah.
So this is going to be clearly evolving.
Yeah.
So it's. I mean, basically all we've done is we've drawn a dotted line around the space. But I mean, corridors are good overall. I mean, as far as moving things forward, it's a great first step.
Sure, they're good. They're good, but the problem is when you start getting to scale these things, and you have issues like micro weather, or you have an unseen issue that requires you to let's say it's an aircraft emergency with a helicopter, and they have to transit through a corridor, and so you have to go around that. I mean, I know it talks about in the ConOps about having the capability in place to get that information out to the UAM participants in the corridor, that there's going to be something coming through here at this time,
right?
And so you're going to have to get around it. But so what do? Do you hover? Do you wait? Do you go outside the corridor? So there's going to have to be additional, obviously, ConOps to meet those issues. And I right now the entire structure is not looking at those contingencies, because when you look at all these platform makers and they say that we have this much endurance, that's great, or this much range, that's point to point. They're not taking into account any kind of problems they might have in between, which business aviation does. Business aviation has some sort of fudge factor in there for if there's an unforeseen incident that causes them to go off of their flight plan for to avoid weather or whatever it is.